The morning rain hung low over Chicago, soft and silver, coating the streets in a quiet haze. Scarlet haze held her coat close as she hurried down Monroe Street, the hum of the city still half asleep around her. She was 4 months pregnant, her body slower now, but her routine never changed. Every morning before the sun came up, she took the L train downtown, changed into her uniform in a narrow locker room, and began cleaning offices before the workday started. The pay was barely enough, but it was steady, and steady to Scarlet meant survival. As she turned into the Adams/Wabash underpass, the familiar smell of damp concrete mixed with roasted coffee from a nearby stand. Along the wall, a few people huddled under blankets, faces she had come to recognize over the past few months. A man who sold pencils from a paper cup, a woman with a tired dog wrapped in a scarf. They never asked much, and Scarlet never had much to give, but she always stopped anyway. She bought 3 coffees and a small bag of pastries from the vendor across the street. Her hands trembled slightly as she balanced the drinks, the morning chill seeping through her gloves. "Here," she said softly, passing the cups to the ones waiting by the wall. They smiled, their eyes lighting up, that brief flicker of gratitude that always warmed her more than the coffee ever could. But today there was someone new. At the far end of the tunnel, near the flickering light, stood a man she hadn't seen before. He looked younger than the rest, maybe mid-30s, his face shadowed by a hood. One leg was braced awkwardly by a pair of metal crutches, and his hair, long unkempt, dark, fell across his forehead. He wasn't holding a sign, wasn't asking for anything. He simply stood there, watching the puddles gather near his feet. Something about him made Scarlet stop. Maybe it was the stillness, the quiet dignity in the way he didn't beg. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward him. "You look like you could use this," she said gently, offering a small paper bag and a steaming cup of coffee. When he didn't reach for them right away, she added, "Take it, please." The man finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were a deep gray, tired, wary yet strangely kind. He accepted the bag and the bill folded beneath it, a crumpled $5 note. His fingers brushed hers for a second, cold and shaking. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice rough, almost unused. Scarlet smiled faintly. "Take care of yourself, okay?" He nodded once, eyes lowering again, as if the simple kindness weighed heavier than he expected. She turned to leave, her shoes splashing softly through the shallow puddles. But as she stepped back into the morning light, the city noise began to fade. Somewhere deep inside her, a familiar ache stirred, a memory pressing at the edges of her mind. The smell of rain, the sound of footsteps, the helplessness of standing small in a world that didn't care. Before she could stop it, the past began to rise, uninvited, unstoppable. And by the time Scarlet reached the end of the street, she was no longer in Chicago anymore, but back in a place she had spent years trying to forget. The trailer park on the edge of Springfield had always smelled like rain and gasoline. Rust streaked down the aluminum walls of the old trailer where 5-year-old Scarlet lived with her mother. Inside, the air was thick with the sour scent of cheap vodka and burnt food. Her mother slept most afternoons, the television muttering in the background, while empty bottles rolled across the floor whenever a truck passed by on the road outside. That morning, Scarlet's stomach cramped from hunger. The only food left was a half loaf of bread on the counter, already hard at the edges. She climbed onto a chair, quiet as she could, and tore off a piece. The crust scratched her throat as she swallowed, praying her mother wouldn't wake. But the sound of a glass hitting the floor made her freeze. Her mother stirred, eyes glassy and unfocused. "Put that down," she slurred, voice heavy with anger. Scarlet stepped back, clutching the bread behind her. The slap came fast, sharp and hot against her cheek. She didn't cry, just stared at the woman who looked more like a stranger than a parent. The next day, when Mrs. Rosa Green from the trailer next door stopped by. She found the little girl sitting on the steps outside, shivering in a too-thin sweater. Rosa had watched them for months, listening to the shouting through the thin trailer walls, seeing Scarlett's bruised knees and hollow eyes. That afternoon she made a call. "There's a child here," she told the voice on the line. "She needs help." 2 days later, a county car pulled up. A woman in a brown coat stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a soft voice that didn't match the hard reality of what was about to happen. Scarlett's mother was drunk again, yelling that they couldn't take her child. But she stumbled, tripped over an empty bottle, and never even looked at Scarlett when the caseworker knelt to tie the girl's shoelaces. "Come on, sweetheart," the woman said. "We're going somewhere safe." Scarlett looked back as they walked away. Her mother had slumped against the doorframe, muttering something she couldn't understand. The wind caught the door and slammed it shut, cutting the trailer from view. The foster center in Springfield was cleaner than home, but colder. Meals came on schedule, lights went out at 9, and everything smelled of bleach. The other kids whispered at night, trading stories about the families who might choose them. Scarlett listened in silence, staring at the ceiling, waiting for someone to say her name, but no one ever did. Years passed that way. One by one, her friends were taken away by smiling couples, leaving empty beds behind. Scarlett stayed, small and quiet, a child too cautious to hope. She learned to fold her clothes perfectly, to say thank you, even when it didn't matter, and to never ask for seconds at dinner. On her 10th birthday, one of the younger girls whispered, "Aren't you sad no one picked you?" Scarlett shook her head, forcing a smile. But that night, under the thin blanket, she whispered to the dark, "If I ever have a child, I'll never let them feel unwanted." It was a promise she carried for the rest of her life, a fragile vow born in a cold, fluorescent hallway, where love had been something she'd only ever watched happen to someone else. By the time Scarlett turned 20, the past had become something she rarely spoke about. She was a student at the University of Illinois Chicago, majoring in economics, a practical choice, safe and predictable. Her scholarship covered tuition, but rent meant sharing a tiny off-campus apartment with 2 girls her age, Sophie Miller and Tara Collins. They were everything Scarlett wasn't: loud, fashionable, carefree. Their nights started when hers ended, music blaring through thin walls, perfume mixed with cheap vodka, strangers laughing in the kitchen. At 2 a.m. Scarlett didn't fit. They called her grandma, student behind her back, and sometimes to her face, half joking, half mean. "You should come out with us once," Sophie said one Friday afternoon, leaning against the doorframe in her sparkly crop top. "You study too much. It's weird." Tara chimed in, smirking. "We're going to Evanston tomorrow. Picnic by the lake. Boys. Drinks, the whole thing. Come on, live a little." Scarlett hesitated. The thought of going anywhere with them made her stomach tighten. But she was tired of always being the outsider. Maybe, she thought, if she went just this once, they'd stop teasing her. She forced a smile and nodded. "Okay, I'll come." The next day, the sky was clear, and the breeze off Lake Michigan was cool and clean. Scarlett wore a simple denim jacket and brought lemonade she'd made herself. The others laughed when they saw it. "So wholesome," Tara joked, shaking her head. They spread out a blanket near the water. Someone turned on music. Others passed around plastic cups filled with bright red punch. Scarlett took a sip, sweet, tangy, and didn't realize until later that the sweetness came from more than just juice. An hour passed. Her head grew light, her laughter easier, and her words slower. The girls whispered to one another, snickering. Tara pulled out her phone, filming as Scarlett tried to stand, stumbled, and spilled the cup over her jeans. "Oops! Grandma can't hold her juice." Sophie laughed, her voice sharp. Scarlett blinked through the blur, humiliation burning through the haze. She saw the phone raised. The flash of a camera, the smirks around her. "Stop it!" she whispered, but the laughter only grew louder. She turned and ran. The sand slipped under her shoes. Her breath shallow, the world spinning. She didn't stop until she reached the quiet edge of the park, where the music had faded and only the wind off the lake remained. Tears stung her face, hot against the cold air. Then she heard footsteps behind her. A male voice called out, "Hey, are you okay?" She turned. A tall student stood there, wearing a faded UIC sweatshirt, concern etched across his face. "You're going to trip if you keep running like that," he said softly. When Scarlett tried to answer, her voice broke. The man, David Bennett, senior in the business program, offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was steady, warm. He led her back toward the path, saying nothing more. And for the first time in her life, Scarlett felt something unfamiliar. Not pity, not judgment, but respect. It was quiet, gentle, and it made her heart tremble. Scarlett had never believed love could happen to her. Not after a childhood that taught her to expect little and ask for less. But with David Bennett, everything felt different. What began as kindness after a cruel prank turned into long walks through the city, quiet conversations over coffee, and laughter that made her forget the emptiness she'd carried for years. David was smart, confident, and full of warmth, the kind of person who saw good in everyone. He talked about starting his own business one day, about traveling, about a life built on more than money or name. Scarlett listened, fascinated by how sure he was of the future. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine being part of one. But not everyone shared David's optimism. His parents, Richard and Helen Bennett, were old Chicago money, people who hosted charity galas and belonged to private country clubs. When they found out their son was dating a girl who had grown up in foster care and cleaned offices for extra income, they didn't hide their disdain. Helen's voice over dinner was cold enough to chill the air. "You're an adult, David. You can have your phases. But don't pretend this girl belongs in our world." "She's not a phase," David said, jaw tight. "She's kind, and she's stronger than anyone I know." Richard folded his napkin slowly, eyes narrowing. "Strength doesn't pay bills. You'll grow out of this." They didn't. Instead, David packed his things and moved into a tiny basement apartment in Rogers Park with Scarlett. The place was small, with peeling wallpaper and a window that barely caught the light, but they didn't care. They cooked cheap dinners together, instant noodles, canned soup, fries they made too salty, and watched Netflix on David's old laptop, wrapped in the same blanket through the long Chicago winters. Scarlett found joy in the smallest things. David's habit of humming while he shaved, the way he always saved the last cookie for her. She learned what love meant, not grand gestures, but safety. Then, one gray morning, everything shattered. David had picked up a night shift at the convenience store near the highway. He promised to bring her breakfast when he came home. Scarlett woke to a knock on the door instead. 2 police officers stood outside, hats in hand. The words didn't make sense at first. Accident, black ice, he didn't make it. At the morgue, Scarlett stood frozen beside the cold metal table, her hands pressed to her chest. The man who had once brought color to her world now lay still, pale and impossibly far away. The funeral was crowded with strangers in dark coats. Helen Bennett's sobs filled the chapel. When she saw Scarlett standing in the back, she turned, her grief twisting into fury. "You killed my son!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the hall. "He threw his life away for you." Scarlett couldn't answer. The room blurred. Her knees buckled, and the world went silent except for the sound of her heart breaking. Quiet, steady, and final. The days after David's death blurred together like a film she couldn't stop replaying. Scarlett drifted through them as a shadow, eating without tasting, sleeping without rest. The apartment still smelled like him. Aftershave, detergent, and coffee. His jacket hung on the chair by the door, just as he'd left it. Every night, she pulled one of his shirts close and fell asleep with her face pressed to the fabric, breathing in the fading scent as if it might bring him back. Weeks later, when the nausea began, she didn't think much of it at first. Grief had ruined her appetite, she told herself. But when she missed her second period, dread sank in. The test she took in the bathroom turned positive almost instantly, a single pink line that changed everything. For hours she sat on the floor, her back against the wall, the test still clutched in her hand. The air felt too thin. David was gone, and now there was a part of him growing inside her. Joy should have followed, maybe comfort, but all she felt was fear. By the end of that week, Scarlett gathered her courage and went to the Bennett's house in North Shore. The sky was overcast, and the mansion loomed like something from another world. She rang the bell twice before Helen Bennett opened the door, her expression stiff with annoyance. "I just wanted to tell you," Scarlett began softly. "I'm pregnant. It's David's. You're going to be grandparents." For a second, there was silence. Then Helen's lip curled. "You expect sympathy," she said sharply. "You think this will make us accept you." Richard stepped forward from the hall, voice flat. "Whatever you want from us, money, a place to stay, you won't get it. Leave." Scarlett's eyes burned. "I didn't come for anything. I just thought you should know." Helen's tone cut through the air like ice. "You've taken enough from this family. Don't come back." And she shut the door. Scarlett stood on the front steps for a long time, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She felt smaller than she ever had before, small and alone, in a world that suddenly had no place for her. The next morning, she took a bus to St. Mary's Medical Center. The walls were too white, the smell of antiseptic too sharp. At the front desk, her voice trembled as she said the words she'd practiced in her head. "I need to schedule a procedure." The nurse nodded gently, led her to a small consultation room. That's where Dr. Evelyn Carter entered, an older woman with silver hair pulled neatly back and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. They talked quietly. When Scarlett confessed her story, Dr. Carter leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "You've been through a lot, honey, but don't make a decision in pain. You'll regret it for the rest of your life." That night, Scarlett dreamed of David. He stood on the lakefront, sunlight behind him, smiling the way he used to. "You're stronger than you think," he said, before fading into the light. When Scarlett woke, the sky was pale with dawn. She pressed a hand to her stomach, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time since losing him, she whispered, "I'll do this. For both of us." It was the first real choice she'd made for herself, and the one that would change everything. Scarlett never went back to campus after the winter semester ended. Tuition notices piled up in her email, but she couldn't bring herself to open them. She withdrew, quietly, took the city bus each morning into downtown Chicago, and started working as a janitor for a corporate office on State Street. The work was steady, and it kept her moving, which was all she needed to get through the days. Every morning before sunrise, she passed through the Adams/Wabash underpass, the same tunnel where the city's forgotten gathered for warmth. The walls were always damp, the smell of rain and exhaust lingering long after traffic cleared. She often saw the same faces she'd once helped, but she walked faster now, one hand on her growing belly, afraid of what people might think if they saw her pregnant and alone. That morning, a noise stopped her, a sharp cry followed by laughter. At the far end of the tunnel, beneath a flickering light, a group of young men in hoodies had surrounded someone. Their voices were taunting, cruel. Scarlett squinted through the shadows. The man on the ground looked familiar, thin, wearing a torn jacket, one crutch knocked aside. The stranger she'd once given coffee to. The leader of the group kicked the crutch across the floor. "Get up, old man," he sneered. Thought you owned this spot." Scarlet froze. Her instinct screamed to turn away, but the sound of another kick cut through her chest. Before she could think, she was running toward them. "Stop!" she shouted. Her voice echoed through the tunnel, trembling but loud. "Leave him alone!" The men turned, surprised. "Lady, back off," one of them warned. But Scarlet didn't. She picked up the crutch and swung it toward the nearest one, hitting his arm. "I said stop," she cried. It only made them angrier. One of them shoved her hard. She stumbled, falling to the cold concrete, her hand instinctively wrapping around her belly. Panic flooded her veins, but she managed to scream, "Police! Somebody call the police!" The group scattered, their sneakers slapping against the wet ground as they disappeared into the street. Scarlet gasped for breath, trying to steady herself. The man on the ground struggled to sit up, his leg bent awkwardly. She crawled to him, her palms scraped raw. "Are you okay?" she whispered. He looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You shouldn't have done that," he muttered, wincing as he tried to move. She shook her head, half laughing, half crying. "You were getting killed. What was I supposed to do?" For a moment he said nothing. Then, as she helped him sit up, his voice softened, rough but sincere. "Thank you for seeing me." Scarlet smiled weakly, brushing the dust from her uniform. "You're welcome." When the sirens finally wailed in the distance, she helped him lean against the wall, waited until the police arrived, then left quietly before anyone could ask questions. The next morning, as she walked through the same tunnel, he was there again, this time on his crutches, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You came back," he said with a small smile. From then on, every morning began the same way. 2 cups of coffee, a few words exchanged, and the quiet comfort of not being invisible anymore. The next morning, Scarlet's steps echoed through the underpass, but the space felt emptier than usual. The man on crutches, the one who had started greeting her with quiet smiles and shared coffee, wasn't there. She stopped, scanning the walls where he usually stood, but there was only an empty cup on the ground and the sound of water dripping from a cracked pipe. All day at work, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The city outside the office windows blurred in her mind as she wiped desks and emptied trash cans. Maybe he'd moved somewhere warmer. Maybe he'd been hurt again. Chicago wasn't kind to people who fell behind. By late afternoon, as she walked home, she noticed flashing blue lights in the distance. Police cars blocked the entrance to the same tunnel she passed every day. A crowd had gathered, whispering. Scarlet edged closer, her heart thudding when she heard someone mention Vega Crew. Officers in dark jackets were leading a group of handcuffed men toward the cars. The same faces she'd seen that night, the ones who had beaten him. The scene pulsed with noise, radios crackling, commands shouted. And at the center of it all stood a man she recognized immediately, only different. The long hair was gone. The crutches were gone too. He wore a tactical vest, his movements precise and commanding. For a moment, Scarlet couldn't breathe. It was him, the stranger from the tunnel, but now he was surrounded by officers calling him Lieutenant Reed. He turned, scanning the crowd, and their eyes met. A flicker of recognition softened his serious expression. He spoke briefly to one of the officers, then walked toward her. "Scarlet," he said quietly when he reached her. His voice was steady but tinged with something. Guilt, maybe. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I had to finish something." She stared at him, words tangled in her throat. "You're a cop." He gave a sheepish smile, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, undercover. We've been after those guys for months. I couldn't tell you. It was an operation." Scarlet blinked, still trying to bridge the image of the man on crutches with the one standing before her in uniform. "You pretended to be homeless." He nodded. "Sometimes the only way to see what's really happening down here is to disappear into it." His smile faltered slightly. I didn't expect someone to actually notice me. Scarlett let out a shaky breath, half relief, half disbelief. I thought you were hurt. I was, he said softly, eyes meeting hers, just not the way you think. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise around them faded, sirens, radios, the restless murmur of the city, and there was only that quiet connection again, as if the world had folded itself small enough for two people. Nathan finally exhaled, the faintest hint of a smile returning. I owe you dinner, he said. Tomorrow. No disguises this time. Scarlett laughed, the sound catching in her throat. I'll hold you to that. And as he walked back toward his team, she realized that for the first time in months, something inside her felt light again. They met again the next afternoon in Lincoln Park, just as the sun began to dip behind the skyline. The air smelled faintly of grass and rain, and the city's noise softened beneath the sound of rustling leaves. Nathan sat on a bench, no uniform this time, just jeans and a gray sweater that made him look younger, more human. Scarlett hesitated before joining him, her hands folded over her stomach. He smiled faintly. You look better today. I slept, she said. First time in a while. They sat in silence for a moment, watching joggers pass by, a family flying a bright red kite across the lawn. Then Nathan spoke, his voice low. I was married once. He stared straight ahead as he said it. 5 years. Thought I had everything figured out. Steady job, a house in the suburbs. Someone to come home to. Scarlett glanced at him, sensing the heaviness beneath his calm tone. She left, he continued. Met someone else. A businessman. Said she was tired of being a cop's wife. Too many late nights. Too much worry. Not enough luxury, I guess. He gave a small, hollow laugh. That was 2 years ago. Haven't worn a ring since. I'm sorry, Scarlett said quietly. He shook his head. Don't be. It taught me something. People don't always leave because they stop loving you. Sometimes they just love themselves more. Scarlett looked down at her hands, her chest tightening. David, my fiancé, he died in a car accident. It wasn't his fault, but his family blamed me. I tried to tell them about the baby, but her voice trailed off, the words catching in her throat. They didn't want to hear it. I'm all this child has. Nathan turned toward her, eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding, not pity. You've been doing this alone. She nodded. I work nights cleaning offices. It's enough to keep us fed. Some days, that feels like a victory. He studied her face for a moment, then said softly, let me be around, just as a friend. Scarlett hesitated. She'd spent so long building walls that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let anyone in. But something in his voice, steady, kind, certain, made her nod. After that day, Nathan became part of her world in quiet, almost invisible ways. He drove her to doctor's appointments when the buses ran late. When she mentioned craving apples one morning, a bag appeared on her doorstep that evening. He slipped money into her wallet when she wasn't looking, pretending he didn't notice her surprise later. Sometimes they'd meet at the underpass again, sharing coffee as the city woke around them. Other times, they'd sit in his car after work, talking about nothing, music, weather, the people they used to be. Their laughter came more easily now, but beneath it was something deeper, something neither dared name. One night, as Scarlett stepped out of his car, she caught her reflection in the window, her smile softer, her eyes brighter. She turned to thank him, but the words that left her lips felt heavier than gratitude. Good night, Nathan. He held her gaze for a second, longer than usual. Good night, Scarlett. The air between them was charged, fragile, and warm. They both felt it, the quiet gravity pulling two broken souls closer. Though neither was ready to admit they'd already begun to heal each other. It was just past midnight when the first wave of pain hit. Scarlett doubled over in her small kitchen, the sound of rain tapping against the window. At first, she thought it was nothing, just another restless night. But then another contraction came, sharper, deeper. She clutched the counter, breathing hard, and fear shot through her chest. She wasn't ready. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone and dialed the only number she could think of. "Nathan!" she gasped when he answered, her voice barely holding together. "It's time. I think it's happening." "I'm on my way," he said without hesitation. She could hear the sound of keys, movement, urgency in his voice. "Don't move, Scarlett. Just breathe. I'll be there in 10. True to his word, he arrived in 8. The headlights of his car flashed through the rain as he helped her down the steps, one arm steady around her back. "You're going to be okay," he whispered as she gripped his hand. "I've got you." The drive to St. Mary's was a blur of sirens and traffic lights that wouldn't turn green fast enough. Scarlett bit down on her lip to stop herself from crying out. Nathan kept one hand on the wheel, the other reaching for hers every few seconds, grounding her. "Almost there," he murmured again and again, as if saying it could make it true. At the hospital, doctors rushed her into the emergency ward. Her blood pressure was low, her breathing shallow. Nathan wasn't supposed to follow, but when a nurse shouted that they might need a blood donor, he was already there, rolling up his sleeve. "Do it," he said. "Whatever she needs." Scarlett caught glimpses through the haze of pain, the bright lights, the masked faces, the nurse's hand on her shoulder. Then the words, were losing her pressure, cut through the noise. She tried to call out, but the sound never came. Moments later, she heard the faintest cry, a thin, beautiful sound that rose above everything. "It's a boy," someone said. When she opened her eyes again, the world was quiet. The room was dim. The storm outside reduced to a soft drizzle. Her body felt weak, but warmth filled her chest as a nurse placed a small bundle beside her. Scarlett stared at the tiny face, the soft cheeks, the closed eyes, and tears spilled silently down her temples. Nathan stood at the foot of the bed, still in his blood-stained shirt, eyes glassy from exhaustion. He smiled, relief written across his face. "He's perfect," he said softly. Scarlett reached out, her hand trembling as she found his. "You saved us," she whispered. He shook his head. "You did all the hard work." But she knew better. She had seen him sign the forms, heard the word donor, felt his hand when the world was slipping away. As the room fell into silence, Scarlett looked at her son again and whispered to the ceiling, "David, he's ours. Your gift to me." Outside, the city lights glimmered through the rain, and for the first time in a long time, Scarlett felt like she had made it through the storm. A week later, Scarlett was finally discharged. The doctors called it a smooth recovery, but every step still ached. Every breath reminded her how close she'd come to losing everything. When she stepped out into the hospital courtyard, the air smelled fresh from last night's rain. Nathan was waiting by the taxi, holding a small bouquet of daisies and 2 blue balloons that read "It's a boy." His grin was wide, boyish, and full of the kind of warmth she hadn't seen in years. "Welcome home, Scarlett Hayes," he said softly, opening the door. Inside the cab, a tiny car seat was already strapped in. Scarlett laughed, her voice shaky. "You really thought of everything." "Had to," he replied. "You've been through enough chaos. Time for something good." The drive home was quiet except for the sound of Ethan's small breaths from his seat. Scarlett couldn't stop looking at him, the rise and fall of his chest, the perfect curve of his tiny fingers. Nathan caught her smile in the rearview mirror and felt something tighten in his chest. At home, he helped her up the steps, careful and steady. The apartment smelled faintly of clean linen and coffee. Nathan had spent the previous night scrubbing every corner, setting up a bassinet by her bed, filling the fridge with groceries. "You did all this?" she asked, eyes wide. He shrugged. "You saved my life. I figured I should return the favor." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of sleepless nights and small miracles. Nathan learned to warm bottles to just the right temperature, to hold Ethan's head gently while changing him, to rock him when his cries filled the quiet apartment. Sometimes Scarlett would wake at dawn to find Nathan asleep on the couch, the baby resting on his chest, both breathing in perfect sync. "You're getting good at this," she teased one morning. He smiled without opening his eyes. "I've had a good teacher." Weeks passed and life found a new balance. Scarlett returned to part-time work, and Nathan adjusted his shifts so he could be home in the mornings. They ate dinner together every night, sometimes with takeout containers spread across the coffee table, sometimes just soup and toast. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. Then, one afternoon, while Scarlett folded laundry, Ethan sat in his playpen babbling nonsense. Suddenly, his voice grew clear, bright. "Papa." Scarlett froze, turning toward Nathan, who was kneeling beside the crib, his hands stilled, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded slowly, his expression breaking into pure, unfiltered joy. "Papa," Ethan said again, reaching for him. Nathan laughed, scooping the baby into his arms, his voice trembling. "Yeah, buddy, that's me." That night, after Scarlett tucked Ethan into bed, Nathan took her hands and led her to the small balcony. The city lights shimmered below them. He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket. No diamonds, no grand gesture, just sincerity. "You and Ethan," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "You're my family now." Scarlett's breath caught. For a moment, the past, with all its pain and loss, fell away. She nodded, tears glinting in the dim light. "Yes," she whispered. They married a few months later, in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with a handful of friends and Ethan asleep in her arms. Life was still modest, crowded apartments, endless bills, but it was filled with laughter, warmth, and love. And for Scarlett, that was more than enough. Nathan couldn't shake the thought that David's parents had never met their grandson. As much as he loved the life they had built, Scarlett, Ethan, their quiet mornings together, he knew there was still an empty space between the past and the present. So one Saturday afternoon, while Scarlett napped with Ethan on her chest, Nathan slipped out with a small photo envelope in his jacket pocket and drove toward the Bennett's house in North Shore. The mansion looked the same as the day Scarlett had been turned away. Tall gates, trimmed hedges, and windows that reflected nothing but distance. When Richard Bennett opened the door, his expression darkened at the sight of Nathan's police badge. "If this is about the accident, we all ready." "It's not," Nathan said quickly. "I'm not here as an officer. I just thought you should see something." He handed over the envelope. Inside were 3 photos, Scarlett in the hospital bed, smiling weakly, holding a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket, Nathan beside her, tired but proud, and one close-up of the baby, his tiny hand gripping Scarlett's finger. "His name's Ethan," Nathan said softly. "Davidson." Helen appeared behind her husband, her face tightening. "What kind of trick is this?" "No trick," Nathan said, his voice steady. "Scarlett didn't come back because she thought you wouldn't want to see him. But I thought you should know he's your grandson, and he deserves to know where he comes from." For a long moment, the silence was heavy. Then Richard's shoulders began to tremble. He sank into a chair near the doorway, staring at the photo as if the air had left his lungs. "He looks like David," he whispered. Helen stood frozen beside him, her hand covering her mouth. Nathan didn't stay long. Before leaving, he said quietly, "She never blamed you. She just wanted peace." Then he left them sitting there, the photos spread across the table like a small resurrection of the son they had lost. A week later, Scarlett was feeding Ethan in the living room when she heard a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, Helen and Richard stood there, nervous, fragile, human. Helen's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "We're so sorry, Scarlett. We were wrong." Scarlett's throat tightened. For a second, She couldn't speak. Then she stepped aside, motioning them in. "He's sleeping," she said gently. They followed her to the crib. Richard bent down, his hand trembling as he brushed a finger against Ethan's cheek. The baby stirred, blinked, and let out a tiny yawn. Richard's eyes glistened. David used to make that same face when he woke up. Helen covered her husband's hand with her own, her tears falling freely now. Scarlett stood beside them, her heart heavy but full. Nathan watched quietly from the doorway, his arm resting around Scarlett's shoulders. In that small apartment, where laughter and sorrow now shared the same space, something long broken began to mend. 3 generations bound by forgiveness, love, and a little boy who carried the best of both worlds in his smile. The last snow of winter was melting outside, leaving the city glazed in silver light. In the small apartment on the north side of Chicago, laughter drifted from the kitchen table. Scarlett poured tea into 4 mismatched cups, while Nathan bounced Ethan on his knee, making faces that sent the little boy into fits of giggles. Across from them, Richard and Helen Bennett sat side by side, smiling in a way Scarlett had never seen before. Soft, genuine, full of warmth. The kettle hissed quietly as Scarlett set it aside. Helen reached over, tucking a blanket around Ethan's legs. "He's getting so big," she said tenderly. "He has David's eyes." Scarlett nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "And Nathan's stubbornness." Nathan chuckled, handing Ethan a toy car. "Hey, I'll take that as a compliment." The baby squealed with delight, and Richard leaned forward, the corners of his mouth lifting. For months after their reconciliation, the Bennetts had visited every weekend, sometimes bringing home-baked cookies, sometimes just their presence. At first, Scarlett had been cautious, unsure if forgiveness could truly erase the pain of what had been said years ago. But today, watching Richard kneel on the floor to play blocks with his grandson, she realized forgiveness hadn't erased anything. It had simply allowed love to return where grief had once lived. The room glowed with the soft amber of late afternoon. Outside, snowflakes caught in the fading light, swirling lazily before touching the ground. Scarlett leaned back in her chair, the familiar hum of domestic life surrounding her. The faint buzz of the heater, the clink of cups, Ethan's bright laughter echoing off the walls. Nathan reached for her hand beneath the table, squeezing it gently. She turned toward him, her smile easy, natural. "Hard to believe this was once just a dream," she said. He looked around at the table, the flowers Helen had brought, the family gathered, the warmth that filled the room, and nodded. Sometimes the best things start after everything's been broken. Scarlett followed his gaze to Ethan, who was now trying to feed a cookie to his grandfather. Richard laughed, crumbs on his chin, and Helen dabbed at them with a napkin. The sound was light, unguarded. Scarlett felt something inside her settle, a peace she hadn't known since childhood. As twilight deepened, Nathan rose to light a candle on the table. Its small flame flickered, casting a golden halo over the faces around her. Scarlett took a slow breath, feeling the weight of years, lost, sorrow, and rebuilding lift at last. She looked around the room, her heart full. For the first time, there was no ache, no shadow of what had been, just warmth, love, and laughter. Her gaze lingered on Ethan's smile, the way it bridged the past and the future, the way it made everything make sense. And as snow began to fall again beyond the window, she thought quietly to herself, happiness doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes softly in forgiveness, in love reborn, and in the quiet laughter of a child.